Opening the door for developing pieces, this knight prepares to influence the center and potentially leap into active squares. Mirroring the knight's development, immediately contest central squares and maintain flexible piece placement. Establishing a fianchetto on the kingside, this move prepares to control the long diagonal and potentially launch a queenside initiative. Solidifying the pawn structure, 2, d6 prepares, bg and secures the e5 square, a subtle yet significant step in controlling central space. Preparing to pressure the long diagonal, setting up a peaceful development for the queenside. Securing the center's foothold and opening a diagonal for the queen offers active counterplay. Solidifying the center opens clear lines for the queen's bishop while preparing to develop the kingside knight. Developing the bishop to a solid outpost, preparing to castle and connect the rooks. Securing the pawn chain, white establishes central control, anticipating potential pawn breaks. Safeguarding the monarch secures a crucial foothold for central expansion later. Securing the king's safety allows white to consolidate and prepare for central operations. Solidifying the center with a knight, preparing for pawn advances and developing a piece harmoniously. Developing knights to their natural squares solidifies white's central control and prepares for queenside expansion. Shifting the knight to the edge seeks an unhindered path to f6, aiming to contest the center's influence. Preparing for a central pawn push, this knight retreats to a less active square, prioritizing kingside safety and potential regrouping. Unleashing a pawn storm, black immediately challenges white's central control, aiming to pry open the kingside and create attacking avenues. Capturing the pawn opens the f-file, offering potential tactical complications and an immediate challenge to black's kingside. Reclaiming the pawn opens lines and immediately pressures white's central pawn chain. Opening the f-file ignites a dynamic clash, challenging black's king safety amidst the developing piece play. Unleashing the queen's diagonal influence is a bold step, challenging white's centralized pawn structure and opening new avenues for attack. Opening the f-file now forces black to react, potentially creating weaknesses around their monarch. Reclaiming the center and opening lines for your queen feels natural after the pawn exchange. Shifting the bishop to h3 opens up diagonals and prepares for future pawn advances or piece trades, aiming for positional dominance. Repositioning the knight to f6 liberates the e7 bishop and contests the center, setting up potential king's side pressure. Securing the king from potential diagonal threats, while simultaneously preparing for future central maneuvering, opens up dynamic possibilities. Undermining white's king's safety, the bishop exchanges potential threats for a more active square, opening lines that might prove decisive. Chasing the bishop away with the queen clears the e-file and prepares for potential central expansion. A bold repositioning, aiming to disrupt white's queenside and potentially unpin the knight with tempo. Clearing the bishop opens a diagonal, aiming to disrupt black's central pawn structure and create attacking chances. Now black's queen, emboldened, eyes the vulnerable kingside, potentially initiating a rapid assault. Unleashing your queen to the open diagonal hints at central pressure, seeking to exploit black's slightly uncoordinated pieces and potentially expose the kingside. Trading queens now, black embraces a simpler endgame, aiming to neutralize white's kingside space advantage through active piece play. Capturing the bishop solidifies your pawn structure and opens the knight's path for greater influence across the center. Sacrificing the bishop here exchanges a potentially active piece for a knight, simplifying but weakening black's central control further. Opening the b-file grants significant influence over the central open lines. Unleashing a pawn thrust to disrupt white's pawn chain and create diagonal pressure. Initiating pressure on the queenside, the rook seeks active placement on an open file. Seizing the central open file offers a dynamic counterplay opportunity amidst the pawn structure imbalance. Reclaiming central influence and preparing to contest the open files with rook activity. Finally, challenging the queenside pawn structure, aiming to unravel the position and open lines for development. Seizing the open c-file offers a clear avenue for your rooks to penetrate black's position. The knight boldly infiltrates the white queenside, aiming to disrupt the pawn structure and create tactical opportunities on the now open files. Pushing this pawn aggressively contests central territory and aims to disrupt black's knight outpost. Unpinning the knight frees the rook, opening a vital file for potential counterplay against white's isolated pawns. Reclaiming the open file decisively seals black's initiative and prepares for a dynamic counterplay. Reasserting pressure on the d-file, black aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and gain active piece play. Reclaiming the knight to a more active square initiates a fight for central control. Asserting control over the open files is paramount. This action aims to disrupt white's coordination and penetrate the queenside. Anchoring the bishop on the queenside aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and create space. Unleashing a pawn sacrifice to disrupt white's pawn structure and open lines for the rook presents a dynamic shift. A daring trade, sacrificing material for a more open position and potentially active pieces. Opening the g-file offers a counterstrike against white's weakened kingside pawn structure. This knight repositions to a vital outpost, reinforcing the queenside pawn majority and preparing to infiltrate black's weakened central structure. Reclaiming the central pawn structure is paramount, aiming to disrupt white's newly formed island. Sacrificing the knight frees the king and opens a vital diagonal for the bishop. Unleashing the king is risky, but might create counterplay against the exposed white monarch. Reinforcing the kingside pawn structure opens lines for the rook, but neglects the pawn chain's weakness. Pivoting the rook to d4 initiates a powerful centralizing maneuver, eyeing the d-pawn and preparing to contest the open files. Disrupting black's central pawn structure creates immediate threats against the king's safety. The monarch steps into a dangerous clearing, inviting a swift check with the knight. The knight's relocation creates a fork, forcing a decision about the king's safety or peace loss. A moment of reflection for the king, perhaps seeking solace before the inevitable dance on the open g-file. Re-establishing a powerful rook presence on the third rank, preparing to challenge that isolated pawn. Reigniting the kingside attack, this knight boldly ventures forward to contest crucial central squares. Injecting a pawn into the enemy's fortress aims to create space and potential threats for your monarch. Seizing the open file offers a tempting tactical detour, but neglecting king's safety could prove calamitous. The rook's redeployment to the third rank seeks to contest the open file and defend against potential threats against the king. Gathering the king for a defensive standoff, a stark contrast to the open board. Pushing the g-pawn here strains white's kingside pawn structure, creating potential weaknesses while offering no immediate counterplay against black's active rook. Repositioning the knight to the center aims to disrupt white's attacking structure and create counterplay. Repositioning the knight to the center offers a potent blockade against black's advancing pawns, aiming to stifle their initiative. Snatching that rook offers an immediate material gain, but the pawn storm on the kingside might become black's undoing. Sacrificing the pawn opens a crucial path to harass the enemy king. The pawn push opens a critical file for your rook, aiming to dismantle white's fragile king position. The white king is now exposed, and this forcing check aims to regain initiative before black consolidates. The rook's sortie to the king's side, aiming to disrupt the monarch's safety, now faces a defensive redirection. Unlocking the open file with this rook swing is a decisive attempt to exploit the compromised black king. Bringing the rook to the first rank aims to disrupt white's queen and knight coordination. Shifting the rook to b2 aims to challenge black's rampant rook on a4 and prepare for a potential endgame skirmish, preventing further pawn incursions. King's newfound activity is a double-edged sword, potentially exposing it to more danger than it's worth. Opening the king's defense with the rook transfer is a crucial attempt to activate the remaining pieces. The pawn advance here unlocks the queen's diagonal and targets the white king's safety, unleashing the king to reclaim central squares and prepare for the inevitable pawn races ahead. Aggressively pushing the king forward now allows for a potential counterattack on the weakened white pawn structure. Reasserting control over the d-file prevents black from consolidating their material advantage. Shifting the rook to the fourth rank offers an immediate pawn threat and prepares to contest the open file. Shifting the king to the e-file actively supports potential pawn pushes and prevents immediate threats. Driving the king forward now forces white to react to its newfound activity in the center. Asserting pressure on the queen side, this advance aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and create new avenues for attack. Pushing the rook forward is a bold attempt to create active counterplay, but it might overextend and become a target. A desperate king strolls towards the center, seeking safety from the menacing rook. This maneuver aims to disrupt white's rook activity and secure the passed pawn's advance. Targeting the open file is a primary objective now.